Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming back to the Love and Betrayal channel. Today, I have a new and quite interesting story to share with you. The first night he appeared, it started the week after the divorce. Everything was still fresh. The silence in the house, the empty chair at the dinner table, the echo of a missing voice during bedtime stories, and of course, her tears. My daughter Ellie was 7, bright, curious, braver than I ever was at her age. But that week, she cried every night. She didn't throw tantrums, she didn't scream. She just lay in bed, quiet little sobs shaking her shoulders, like she was trying not to wake the whole world with her pain. And honestly, I didn't know what to do. I tried reading longer stories, tried giving her my pillow, tried lying beside her until she fell asleep. Nothing worked. Until he came. It was a Tuesday. The first night I left her bedroom door slightly open. She had cried herself to sleep again, clutching the small stuffed fox her dad gave her on her 5th birthday. I sat in the kitchen, lights dim, head in my hands, exhausted. That's when I heard it. A sound. Not a knock, not a creak, something softer. I got up, confused, walked toward the front door, and froze. Because there, just outside the glass, sat a dog. He was scruffy, small but sturdy, fur matted, ears uneven, tail curled tightly around his body like he was hugging himself. His eyes were bright, even in the porch light, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring toward the hallway, toward Ellie's room. I opened the door slowly. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just tilted his head like he'd been expecting something else. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cold concrete. "Hey there," I whispered. He blinked, didn't growl, didn't bark, just sat. I crouched down, half expecting him to bolt, but he didn't. I reached out my hand. He sniffed it once, then stood, walked past me right into the house. I stood frozen, mouth slightly open, unsure if I should be scared or amazed, but he didn't go far. He walked softly down the hallway, stopped in front of Ellie's door, and sat, perfectly still. I followed, heart racing, and then, from inside the room, a small voice. "Mommy, is that a puppy?" I opened the door. Ellie was sitting up in bed, wide-eyed, tear-streaked. The dog looked at her. She looked at him. And then she smiled. He patted over slowly, sat beside her bed. Ellie reached out her hand. He placed his head beneath it. And for the first time in a week, she didn't cry. I didn't say a word. Just stood there, stunned, as my daughter curled back under the blanket, her hand resting gently on the stray dog's head. Within minutes, she was asleep. I sat on the floor outside her room, staring at the two of them. The dog didn't move. Didn't leave. He just lay there, silent and still, like he had been waiting for this moment. By morning, he was gone. No paw prints on the porch, no scratches on the door. Just a single stray hair on Ellie's blanket. And when I asked her if she remembered anything, she nodded. "He came when I cried," she said. "Who?" "The dog." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to believe. So I didn't. Not yet. Until it happened again. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe the dog had wandered in. Maybe he just happened to be there that night. Strays came and went. It wasn't magic. But deep down, something had tugged at me. Something I didn't want to name yet. The days that followed were calm. Ellie smiled a little more, ate a little better, didn't ask about her father as often. I thought maybe we were turning a corner. But on Friday night, the call came. It was from Ellie's dad. Short, awkward, cold. He wasn't coming for his weekend visit. Something about work, a deadline, maybe next time. When I hung up, Ellie was standing by the door. She had heard everything. She didn't cry right away. She just nodded, walked to her room, and closed the door. I gave her space. Waited 10 minutes. Then 15. And then the sound. Soft, muffled. That quiet, broken sob that every parent learns to hear through walls. I rushed to her door. Paused. Heart tight. Hand raised. And that's when I heard it. Not the crying. The scratch. 3 soft taps against the front door. I walked slowly to the hallway, opened the front door with trembling fingers, and there he was. Again. Same dog, same fur, same calm eye. As if he'd never left. He stepped inside without hesitation. Walked past me like he belonged there. No sniffing, no confusion. Straight down the hallway. Right to Ellie's door. I stood frozen. He sat again. Waited. Then let out a low, gentle huff. Not a bark, just a whisper of sound, like a signal. I opened the door. Ellie was curled under her blanket, face buried in her pillow. She looked up, saw him, and gasped. Mommy, he came back. I nodded slowly. She reached out. He climbed gently onto the bed this time, laid beside her. And again, just like before, the crying stopped. He didn't sleep, didn't curl up. He just lay beside her, watching, breathing with her, like he was matching her rhythm. She fell asleep with her hand tangled in his fur. And I sat in the doorway, arms around my knees, watching this strange miracle unfold for the second time. By morning, he was gone again. No noise, no apartments, no goodbye. Just Ellie's words at breakfast. He only comes when I cry. I looked at her. You're not scared? She shook her head. He doesn't feel scary, he feels safe. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That a stray dog was magically appearing whenever my daughter cried? That he never barked, never stayed, and never came unless summoned by heartbreak? No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But I started to watch. Carefully, quietly. I began keeping the front porch light on at night. I left a bowl of water near the door even when it didn't rain. And just once, I left the door unlocked. Part of me hoping, part of me afraid. One night, Ellie had a nightmare, woke up screaming. I ran to her room, heart pounding, held her close. It's okay, baby. It's just a dream. I'm here. But even as I rocked her, her eyes darted toward the door. He's coming, she whispered. And before I could speak, he was there. This time, he didn't wait at the door. He walked straight in, sat at her feet, and she calmed instantly, like her soul recognized him faster than her eyes ever could. That night, for the first time, I knelt beside him, placed my hand gently on his head. Who are you? I whispered. He didn't respond, but he looked at me, and in that look was something more than animal, something deep, ancient, unshakable, like he had been doing this for a very, very long time. There's something about holding it in, something about being strong for too long. You tell yourself you're doing fine, that you're holding it together for the kids, for the house, for the bills, for the version of yourself that still believes in everything happens for a reason. But grief doesn't need a reason. It just needs a crack to slip through. For me, that crack came on a Thursday. It had been a long week. Ellie was struggling with school again. Her teacher had called, gently suggesting counseling. My job was unstable, hours cut, no warning, and the fridge had started making a sound that could only mean death. That night, after putting Ellie to sleep, after watching her cuddle into her pillow with no tears because he had come again and stayed beside her until she drifted off, I stood in the hallway and stared at nothing. Just stood there. Hands at my sides, heart tight, eyes burning. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, then dropped the glass before I even took a sip. It shattered across the floor, water spilling in all directions. I stared at the mess, too tired to clean it up. And then I broke. Not loud, not dramatic. Just sank to the floor, back against the fridge, knees to my chest, and cried. Not like Ellie cried, soft, scared, innocent. Mine was different. It was tired, worn out, resentful of how much I had held in for so long. I cried for the broken marriage, for the promises that had faded into voicemail apologies, for the girl in the other room who deserved better than a mother, always one step from falling apart, and for myself. Because even if I didn't want to admit it, I missed being held. I missed being seen. I sat there for what felt like forever. The house was silent except for the ticking clock and my shallow breaths. And then I heard it. Soft, steady, pause on the porch, porch. My breath caught. I stood slowly, wiping my face with trembling fingers. Walked to the front door like I was in a dream. Opened it, and there he was. The stray. The one who only came when Ellie cried. Except now he was here for me. He didn't wait this time. He stepped in, walked slowly to the kitchen, saw the broken glass, walked around it like he understood. Then he sat beside me, lowered his head to my lap, and just breathed. I didn't say a word, just placed my hand on his fur, let the warmth of him seep into my bones, let myself lean. It was the first time I let anyone, anything hold me without judgment, without trying to fix me, without asking why I wasn't over it already. He stayed with me all night. When I finally got up to clean the glass, he followed. When I checked on Ellie, he waited at the door. When I lay on the couch, he curled up on the floor beside me. No collar, no tag, no name, just presence. The next morning, I woke up with the blanket half off and the light leaking through the blinds. The couch was empty. So was the hallway. So was the porch. He was gone again, but I didn't feel abandoned. I felt known, like someone had heard what I didn't have the courage to say out loud. At breakfast, Ellie looked at me closely. You look different, she said. Different how? She shrugged. Lighter. I smiled. and for once it didn't feel fake. That day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went outside, sat on the porch with a cup of tea, and wrote in a journal I hadn't opened since before the divorce. I wrote, he came for her, I understood that. But last night he came for me, and I realized maybe we both needed someone who didn't ask questions, who just showed up when the tears were too heavy. Maybe that's what healing really is, not being fixed, just not being alone. That evening, Ellie drew us a picture. It was her, me, and the dog. We were sitting under a tree. There were stars in the sky, tears on our cheeks, and the dog in the middle, smiling. I asked her, "What do you think he is?" She paused, then said, "I think he's not just a dog." I nodded slowly. Me too. That night, I left the door unlocked. Not because I expected him, but because I finally felt like I didn't need to guard my pain anymore. If he came, he came, Shatan. And if not, I knew I was stronger now. Because the night I cried too, I wasn't alone. There are some nights when you just know something's different. It's not the wind, not the sky, not even the way the shadows stretch longer than usual across the hardwood floor. It's something quieter, like a silence that isn't empty, just expectant. That Friday started like any other. Ellie was quiet after school. Not sad, not upset, just quiet. Her eyes lingered longer on the empty photo frame, still sitting by her bedside, the one that used to hold a picture of all three of us. She didn't cry, but I could see it bubbling under the surface, and I knew it was going to be one of those nights. I made mac and cheese for dinner, her favorite. She picked at it. I offered to watch a movie. She said maybe tomorrow. At bedtime, she brushed her teeth in silence, hugged her stuffed fox a little tighter, and when I tucked her in, she whispered, "Do you think he'll come tonight?" I smiled softly. "If he does, he'll know." She nodded but didn't smile back. By 10 p.m., the house had settled. Lights dimmed, curtains swayed gently from the breeze, and I sat on the couch, tea cooling in my hands, eyes darting to the front door more than I wanted to admit. I had grown used to the soft sound of his paws, the almost mystical way he just arrived. Every time Ellie cried, he showed up like a guardian of feelings too big for little shoulders. Every time I cried, he sat with me until I remembered how to breathe again. But tonight, nothing. 11 p.m., still nothing. I checked on Ellie. She was awake, tears running silently down her cheeks, eyes fixed on the door. "Sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling beside her. She turned to me, voice cracking. "He's not coming, is he?" My chest tightened. "I don't know, baby." She didn't say anything, just buried her face in my shoulder and sobbed harder than I'd seen in weeks. And that's when it happened. Not the sound of paws, not the magic breeze that usually preceded his arrival, but a voice in my head, quiet, urgent. "He's not coming because maybe this time he can't." I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, threw on my jacket. Ellie looked up, confused. "Where are you going?" "To find him." Her eyes widened. "Can I come?" I hesitated, then nodded. She wrapped her coat around her pajamas, slipped on her bunny slippers, and we stepped out into the night together. We walked through the neighborhood first. Quiet streets, sleeping houses, no sign of him. We checked the small park down the block, called softly near the bushes around the swings. Nothing. "Where do dogs go when they're scared?" Ellie asked. I knelt beside her. "Where they feel safe." She bit her lip. "Then we should go to the alley behind the bakery. He came from there once, remember?" I nodded. "Let's try." The alley was colder, darker, smelled faintly of old bread and cardboard. We walked slowly, calling gently, hearts thudding louder than our footsteps. "Toast?" I whispered. Yes, I had named him. After weeks of calling him the dog, it felt too impersonal. Toast had warmth to it, simplicity, like something you reach for on the hardest mornings. "Toast," Ellie called again. "It's us." Still nothing. My stomach twisted. What if he was gone? What if something had happened? What if this magic, this strange, healing gift, had an end date? Then we heard it. A faint whimper, so soft I thought I imagined it. Ellie grabbed my hand. "Did you hear that?" We moved toward a stack of broken pallets beside an old crate. Another whimper, this time clear, real. I knelt down, flashlight trembling in my hand. And there he was, curled tightly under the crate, one paw bent awkwardly, eyes dull but alert, muzzle resting on the cold ground. "Toast," I breathed. He blinked, didn't move, didn't wag his tail, but he saw us, and that was enough. Ellie dropped to her knees beside me. Is he hurt? I nodded. Looks like he twisted his paw, maybe more. We need to get him help. I didn't think twice. I reached in, arms trembling, and gently coaxed him out. He didn't fight, didn't resist. Just let me lift him into my arms, like he had been waiting for this all along. Ellie opened the backseat door. We drove to the 24-hour emergency vet, hearts pounding, silence heavy. The vet took him in immediately, examined him, ran scans. The injury was treatable, a bad sprain, possible fracture. Nothing life-threatening. But they said something else too. He's malnourished, the vet said gently. He's been out there longer than you think. I stared. But he comes to our house. The vet frowned. No one's feeding him? Not really, he just appears when we need him. She smiled kindly but didn't understand. Of course she didn't. This wasn't the kind of story science could explain. Ellie and I sat in the waiting room for an hour. No phones, no books, just silence. And when the vet came back and said, "You can take him home now," I realized something. This time, we were the ones who had waited for him. He slept the whole ride back, head in Ellie's lap, her hand in his fur. And when we got home, I laid him on the softest blanket we had, placed a bowl of water beside him. And for the first time, I whispered to the night, "You don't have to come when we cry anymore, Toast. We'll come for you now. We promise." The rain had stopped sometime around dawn. I hadn't slept. I couldn't, not after the night we had. I sat on the living room floor, wrapped in a blanket, head leaning against the couch. Ellie was asleep upstairs, curled around her stuffed fox. And Toast, he lay beside me, gently snoring. One paw wrapped in a soft bandage, his breathing slow and steady. Finally, at peace. Sunlight poured in through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. The storm had washed everything clean. The street outside shimmered with leftover puddles, the leaves on the trees still dripping gently. But inside something was different. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the knowing. We had crossed some invisible threshold. From mystery to belonging. From the stray who came when we cried to the dog we went searching for. I looked at Toast, still fast asleep, and I whispered, "You're not a stranger anymore. You're home." Ellie came down an hour later, rubbing her eyes, hair a tangled halo around her sleepy face. Her gaze found Toast immediately. She dropped to her knees beside him. "He's still here," she breathed. Her voice was filled with awe and relief. "He's staying, right?" I smiled. "He's staying as long as he wants." We spent the whole morning in quiet companionship. No cartoons, no loud breakfast. Just soft music playing in the kitchen, the scent of pancakes, and Toast lying in the sun like a king. The bandage on his paw needed changing, so I called the vet. They gave me instructions, told me what to watch for. Before hanging up, the receptionist asked, "Have you decided to keep him officially?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. I looked at Toast, at Ellie, at the spot on the rug where he always curled up like he belonged there from the beginning. "We haven't decided anything," I said slowly, "but I think maybe he already has." That afternoon, we gave him a bath. It wasn't easy. Toast wasn't a fan of water. He tolerated it, standing in the tub like a soldier while Ellie giggled and poured warm water over his back. We discovered he had freckles under all that dirt, little brown spots scattered across his belly. "Toast freckles," Ellie laughed. "He's like a toasted marshmallow." I couldn't stop smiling. After drying him off with 3 towels and a hairdryer, he pranced around the house like a new dog. Clean, proud, home. Later that day, we went shopping. Collar, leash, food bowl, water dish, a soft bed that matched Ellie's blanket. I let her pick everything. She chose a blue collar. Simple, no frills. But she added a tag. Engraved in her tiny, purple handwriting, "Toast. You came when I cried, now I'll come when you call." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I paid the bill. And promised myself, this time no one would leave him behind. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the house settled into that golden, sleepy hush, Toast curled up beside Ellie's bed. He didn't need an invitation anymore. She reached down, ran her fingers through his fur, and then whispered, "You don't have to wait for me to cry anymore. You're allowed to stay even when I smile." I stood in the doorway, hand over my heart. There was something sacred about that moment. Not big, not dramatic, just simple, like a door opening inside all of us. I sat on the porch later, journal in hand, wrote slowly, thoughtfully. Grief brought him to us. Tears made him real. But today, we fed him pancakes, gave him a bath, and bought him a collar. Today, he wasn't a visitor. He was family. And maybe, just maybe, we are healing together. That night, I dreamed of Toast, but not the dirty, limping stray we first met. He was running, free, joyful, healthy. Ellie chased after him, laughing, and behind them I followed, not to catch up, just to witness, to smile, to breathe again. When I woke up, Toast was lying at my feet, head resting on my toes, eyes closed. And I realized something. He wasn't just ours now. We were his. ChatGPT said, Toylian vakatrai team, Ken Iochumta Tiptuk series day camp suk, the stray who only came when my daughter cried, Voy, part 6. He started coming even when we didn't cry. There was a time when we only saw Toast in the shadows of sadness. He came when tears fell, when hearts cracked open, when silence became too loud. But then something shifted. Slowly, quietly, beautifully. He started coming even when we didn't cry. It began with a simple morning. Sunny, light breeze, no school stress, no sad dreams, no reminders of a life that used to be before. Just me in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. Ellie humming to herself at the table, drawing flowers in her notebook. And then the sound of gentle paws on the floorboards. Toast, walking in like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't limping anymore. The sprain had healed, the bandage was gone, but the way he walked, soft, careful, almost respectful, remained the same. As if he understood that this house wasn't just a place. It was a heart, one he had been invited into. Ellie squealed when she saw him. Oh, you came early today. He trotted up to her, rested his head on her knee, tail wagging softly. She placed her pencil down and kissed the top of his head. You didn't even wait for me to be sad. He licked her cheek in response. We spent that day doing nothing particularly special. Toast followed us to the backyard, watched as Ellie chased butterflies, laid under the tree while I read a book I hadn't touched in years. And in those quiet moments, I realized something. He was learning how to stay, not just come, not just appear when summoned by sorrow. He was learning to be part of the ordinary days. And in doing so, he was teaching us that we could be happy again. That evening, Ellie and I made a new tradition. Toast Tuesdays. Every Tuesday after dinner, we took him for a walk down the long gravel path behind the park. We let him lead. Sometimes he walked slowly. Sometimes he pulled ahead like he was chasing an old memory. But every time he came back and waited for us to catch up, just like he always had. One Tuesday, Ellie asked, Do you think Toast ever cries? I looked down at him, walking faithfully beside her. I think he has. Do you think that's how he found us? I paused. Maybe. She smiled at him. Then we'll make sure he never has to cry again. He began to settle into routines like he had always been part of our story. He waited by the door every morning when Ellie left for school. He sat beside me while I worked from home, his chin resting on my foot like a living paperweight. He barked exactly once a day, only at the mailman and never mean. I caught myself laughing more, sleeping better, breathing easier. And I knew it wasn't because everything was perfect. It was because Toast was still there, even when nothing was broken. One night, Ellie came to my room holding a crayon drawn. Look, she said proudly, it's our family. There were 3 of us, me, her, and Toast. He was wearing a crown. I laughed. Why is Toast wearing a crown? She looked at me like I'd asked the world's most obvious question, because he's the one who saved us. I didn't cry, but I felt the tears somewhere deep behind my smile, because she was right. He didn't just save us from sadness. He saved us from staying in sadness, from believing that tears were the only time we deserved love. One morning, I woke up and Toast wasn't at the door. He wasn't at the foot of my bed, or on the rug, or under Ellie's window. My heart raced. I searched the house quietly, not wanting to wake Ellie. But when I stepped outside, there he was, sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise, calm still as if he'd been waiting for the day, not us. I sat beside him, crossed my legs, and we watched together. No words, just the warmth of a new morning wrapping around us like a promise. A promise that not every good thing leaves, that sometimes it stays, quietly, faithfully, like a dog who learned how to wait and then how to stay. That night, I wrote in my journal, he came when we cried, he stayed when we didn't, and now he's simply here. He doesn't need to be our hero anymore, he's our friend, and maybe, just maybe, that's even more sacred. Ellie began writing her own journal. One entry made me cry. In her looping, crooked handwriting, she wrote, Toast doesn't just come when I'm sad anymore. Now he comes when I build pillow forts, when I sing songs about jellyfish, when I spin in circles until I fall down. He comes when I'm happy, because he wants to be happy too. It was a Thursday afternoon when the knock came. 3 short raps on the door, not the mailman, not Ellie's friends, not a neighbor bringing over muffins. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart oddly uneasy, and opened the door. A woman stood there. Mid-30s, sharp blazer, too perfect smile. Behind her, a man, tall, serious eyes, holding a printed flyer in one hand. "Hi," the woman began. "Sorry to bother you. We're actually looking for someone." I blinked. "Someone?" She smiled. "Well, something." The man lifted the flyer. A photo, blurry but familiar. My breath caught in my chest. "Toast." My voice was quiet. "That's a dog." "Yes," the man said, stepping forward. "His name's Murphy. He's been missing for almost 5 months." My hands trembled just slightly. "Murphy?" They nodded. The woman continued. "We were driving through the neighborhood, posting flyers, when one of the kids at the park said there's a dog who looks exactly like this, said he's always with a little girl named Ellie." She looked at me, gentle but firm. "That's your daughter, right?" I swallowed hard. Behind me, I heard soft paw steps. And then there he was. Toast. Walking up beside me. No fear, no hesitation. Just standing. By me, like he always did. The woman gasped, "Murphy!" She knelt down, arms wide. But Toast didn't move. Didn't wag, didn't whine, didn't take a single step forward. He just looked at her. Calm, silent. Ellie ran down the stairs, her voice high and confused. "Ma, who's at the—" She stopped when she saw them, then saw Toast. And instinctively, she stepped between them, her small hand resting on his back. The man smiled kindly. "We're so grateful you've taken care of him. We've been heartbroken for months." "Where did you lose him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Out by the lake, about 12 miles from here," the woman said. "He got out during a storm. We searched for weeks." My chest tightened. 12 miles. Storm. Wasn't that the night he first came? "Did he ever find his way home before?" I asked. They shook their heads. "No, this is the first lead we've had. But now that we've found him," she stepped forward. Toast stepped back. Just one pace. Still calm, still watching. Ellie's voice trembled. "He doesn't know you." The woman blinked. "Oh, sweetheart, he's just confused. He's been through a lot." But Toast didn't look confused. He looked, "Sure." "I'm sorry," I said, "but do you have any proof he's yours?" They exchanged a glance. The man pulled out his phone, showing pictures. A younger Toast, sitting by a fireplace, a birthday hat on his head, his fur a little cleaner, his eyes just as gentle. They called him Murphy in every photo. My heart ached, because maybe it was true. Maybe he was theirs. "Before, can we have a moment?" I asked. They stepped back. I knelt beside Toast. Ellie did too. "Is this where you're supposed to go?" I whispered. He looked at me, then at Ellie, then leaned his head against her shoulder, and stayed. I stood, walked back to the door, and said something I didn't expect. "You can come in, sit with him." "Sit with him, let him decide." They hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Toast lay down in the center of the room. The woman knelt again, called his name. "Murphy, it's me, it's Jenna." He blinked, but didn't move. She tried again. "Murphy, come." Nothing. Then Ellie spoke. "Toast, Toast, do you want to stay?" He wagged his tail. "Just once." Jenna's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me. "He remembers us, but he's not choosing us." I nodded slowly, and gently said, "Sometimes the ones we lose come back, but they don't belong to us anymore." They stayed for another minute, then quietly stood. The man placed the flyer on the table. "In case anything changes, then la friendship sapete. He's lucky to have you, both of you." They walked out without another word. Ellie didn't speak for a while after they left. She just curled up beside Toast, her arms wrapped tightly around him. And he rested his head on her knee like nothing had changed. That night, I wrote in my journal, the world tried to take him back today, but he didn't go, not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. Love isn't about where you came from, it's about where you're needed most. And right now, he's needed here. They never came back. The couple who called him Murphy, who showed us the old photos, who thought they'd found something lost. And maybe in a way they had. But something deeper happened that day, not just for them. For us, for Toast. He didn't change after that. He didn't act more distant or more clingy. He was just Toast, still laying beside Ellie every night, still sitting quietly at the door when she left for school, still watching the sunrise with me on Sundays. Only now there was something in his eyes, a calmness, a certainty, like he had chosen, and had been waiting for the world to accept that choice. One morning, a few weeks later, Ellie said something that stopped me in my tracks. We were packing her lunch, and Toast was snoring lightly in the corner. She looked at me and asked, "Do you think Toast was sent for us?" I smiled. Maybe. She paused. Do you think we were sent for him? That question hung in the air like sunlight through dust. I didn't have an answer. Only tears. That weekend, we took him to the beach. Ellie ran barefoot along the shore, laughing so hard, I forgot we ever used to cry at night. Toast chased the waves, barking like a puppy. He'd never done that before. Never barked, but now it wasn't to warn or protect. It was joy. Raw, loud, unapologetic. And that's when I knew he wasn't guarding us anymore. He was finally living too. That evening, I sat with Toast in the sand while Ellie built lopsided castles beside us. The sky was pink, then gold, then purple. The kind of sunset that makes you want to whisper secrets to the wind. And I said quietly, "You were never ours, Toast." He looked up at me, blinked. "But you stayed anyway, and that means more." He leaned his head against my knee and stayed there until the stars came out. The years passed, not in leaps, in tiny steps. Slow mornings, backyard giggles, the sound of claws on hardwood at dinner. Ellie grew taller. Toast grew older. His face turned white around the muzzle. His eyes fogged just a bit. His steps slowed. But he never missed a moment. Not one. He was there for Ellie's first sleepover. When she cried because she missed me, Toast curled up by her side at her friend's house, like he'd followed her across the universe. He was there when I lost my job. Sat by my desk the day I sent my last email, never judging, just reminding me I wasn't alone. He was there when we sold the old couch, the one he chewed the corner of as a pup. We joked it should go to a museum. Toast watched them carry it out, and then hopped onto the new one like a king reclaiming his throne. And then one spring morning, he didn't get up right away. He opened his eyes when Ellie called, licked her fingers, then laid his head back down. His breaths were slow, peaceful, like he was listening to something far away. We both lay beside him that day. Ellie read from her favorite book. I hummed the lullaby I used to sing when she was a baby. And Toast, he just listened. As the sun began to set, Toast took one final breath, deep, soft, and full of all the love we had poured into him. And then he let go. We buried him under the sycamore in the backyard, the same tree that had watched us fall apart, and rebuild together. On the stone we placed there, Ellie wrote, "Toast, he came when I cried. He stayed when I laughed. He left when we could stand on our own." That night, the house felt too quiet. No claws, no tail against the wall, no warm body curled at the foot of Ellie's bed. She cried, of course. So did I. But it was different. This time, the tears weren't from loss. They were from gratitude. "I miss him," she whispered. I hugged her tightly. "I do too." Then I said something I didn't plan. "But love doesn't always stay in the body, Ellie. Sometimes it stays in the space between us. In the silence, in the way we remember, in the way we keep going." That night, neither of us expected him to come. But just as we were falling asleep, a breeze lifted through the open window. The curtains swayed, and in the distance, a soft, familiar sound, like the echo of a tail thumping gently on wood. Just once, then silence. And somehow that was enough. I opened my journal one last time, wrote, "Toast never belonged to us. He belonged to something bigger, to every tear that needed quiet company, to every heart learning to beat again. He wasn't the dog who stayed because we needed him. He stayed until we remember we could stay for each other. And then, like all the best kinds of love, he left behind a light that never goes out. The end